Did you know that Max Verstappen's engineer found something troubling in his car's data right after practice for the Australian Grand Prix? At first, it seemed like a minor telemetry detail, but when they reviewed the full figures, the team realized the car was losing a huge amount of power just before the fastest braking zones. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, do you think Red Bull really has the strongest car this season, or is something not working as it seems? Because the big question now is this: what exactly did Verstappen's engineer discover in the car's data, and why might it change the way Max attacks the Melbourne weekend? Stay tuned until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In this analysis, we'll break down what really happened after practice for the Australian Grand Prix, what the technical data from Verstappen's car revealed, and why this finding has caused concern within the team. It's not a broken part. The problem is much deeper and has to do with how the car performs under the new technical regulations. The story begins in the quietest moment of a Formula One weekend, when the cars have already returned to the garage and the engineers begin reviewing every line of data left behind on the track. After practice for the Australian Grand Prix, Max Verstappen's car appeared on the surface to be completely competitive. The times were solid, the car's overall balance showed no obvious problems, and from the outside, Red Bull seemed to still be among the favorites. But in Formula One, reality is rarely found in what you see from the stands or on the timing sheets. The real story always emerges in the telemetry, in those thousands of data points that engineers analyze for hours, searching for patterns that go unnoticed at first glance. It was precisely in this analysis that Verstappen's race engineer detected something that immediately caught his attention. On the long straights at Albert Park, the car reached very competitive speeds at the start of the straight, exactly what you'd expect from a Red Bull. However, a few seconds later, something strange happened. The acceleration began to drop off abruptly, as if the car stopped pushing just when there were still many meters to go before braking. This loss wasn't small or gradual. It was a clear drop in power delivery, large enough to completely alter how the car approached the circuit's most important braking zones. When the team delved deeper into the data, the pattern began to repeat itself lap after lap. The car dropped from speeds close to 350 kilometers per hour to much lower values before braking, something that didn't match what the engineers expected from the simulation model they had prepared before the weekend. In other words, the car was promising a very high top speed at the start of the straight, but it couldn't sustain that power until the end of the straight. This inconsistency began to raise questions within the garage itself, because on a circuit like Melbourne, every meter of acceleration counts when you reach hard braking zones. When the engineers began cross-referencing the car's telemetry with the simulation models they had prepared before the Grand Prix, the first indication that something wasn't working as it should emerged. The car's hybrid system was releasing electrical energy with enormous intensity at the start of the straights, which explained the highly competitive initial speeds Verstappen was achieving. However, this discharge was too aggressive. The battery was being depleted sooner than expected, causing the electric motor to cut out when the car was still far from the braking point. This phenomenon has a well-known name in Formula One engineering: energy clipping. It means that the available energy in the battery is depleted before the car has completed the entire straight, leaving the combustion engine working almost exclusively for the final meters. In practical terms, this creates a huge difference in acceleration between cars that still have electrical energy available and those that have already used it up. Internal team comparisons reveal that some rivals could maintain electric power for longer, allowing them to continue accelerating while the Red Bull began to lose momentum. But the statistic that truly surprised the team wasn't just the power loss. It was the magnitude of the difference. In some sections of a circuit, Verstappen's car was losing more than 150 horsepower just before braking. This means that while another car could continue pushing to speeds approaching 360 kilometers per hour, the Red Bull was already dropping to around 300 kilometers per hour before braking. This isn't just a matter of pure performance. This difference also completely alters the braking reference point and can create awkward situations when several cars are approaching the end of a straight together. Once the pattern in the data was identified, the conversation in the Red Bull garage quickly shifted. Initially, the engineers thought it was a simple energy map adjustment that could be corrected with minor software tweaks to the hybrid system. But the more they analyzed Verstappen's laps, the more apparent it became that the problem wasn't so straightforward. The electric motor's power delivery wasn't aligned with the timing of the car's aerodynamic setup changes to reduce drag on the straights. In other words, the car was entering its fastest aerodynamic mode just as the battery was starting to run low. From a driver's perspective, this combination creates a very difficult feeling to manage. Verstappen explained to the engineers that the car felt incredibly strong at the start of the straights, as if it were unleashing its full potential all at once. But seconds later, that feeling would abruptly disappear. The thrust would drop off, and the car would start to feel lighter at the front while still in its low-drag configuration. This unexpected transition forces the driver to make slight steering corrections as they approach the braking zone, something that on a fast circuit can affect both confidence and precision at the braking points. Within the team, the reaction was relatively calm but highly analytical. Red Bull understands how to manage complex hybrid regulations better than almost anyone, and so the engineers began reviewing not only the energy deployment, but also the logic that connects that deployment to the car's aerodynamic modes. The data suggested that the system was allowing the car to reduce its drag too early, increasing the electrical system's energy demand at a point where the battery couldn't sustain that level of power for the entire straight. This misalignment between energy and aerodynamics became the focus of the team's technical analysis. In Verstappen's case, the sudden loss of power at the end of the straights not only affects top speed, but also completely changes how the driver prepares for each braking point. Under normal conditions, a driver uses extremely precise references to always brake at the same point on the track. But if the car arrives at the braking point 10, 20, or even 30 kilometers per hour slower than expected, that reference point becomes unreliable. The driver must adjust their instincts in fractions of a second, something that can become a challenge even for a world champion when it happens lap after lap. Another important effect appears when cars are racing directly on the track. If a rival maintains electric power for a longer distance on the straight, they can close the gap much faster than expected. This means that a car that seemed to be at a safe distance can suddenly appear in the rearview mirror just before the braking point. For engineers, this type of speed difference is particularly critical because it completely alters the dynamics of overtaking and defending. A driver might think they have enough margin to cover the inside of a corner, but if the car behind conserves electrical energy for longer, that margin disappears in a matter of seconds. The situation also affects race pace on long runs. In an ideal simulation, the team wants the car to deliver power consistently throughout each lap so they can accurately calculate tire wear, energy consumption, and race strategy. However, when the battery runs out sooner than expected and the car enters energy clipping, the car's behavior changes from lap to lap. This complicates the team's ability to project the car's true pace over a full race and forces engineers to constantly adjust the energy maps to prevent the power loss from occurring at the same points on the track. If Red Bull can fine-tune the energy maps to prevent the battery from depleting too quickly on the straights, the picture could change rapidly. Verstappen is one of the most capable drivers when it comes to extracting performance from cars with narrow operating windows, and that skill could make a huge difference in qualifying. On a fast street circuit like Albert Park, where a perfect lap depends on tiny tenths of a second in each sector, maintaining electric power throughout the straight could mean several extra kilometers per hour before each braking zone. That advantage could be enough to put the car on the front row of the grid. However, the big question mark lies in race pace. During a Grand Prix, the car must repeat the same behavior for dozens of laps with varying levels of battery, fuel, and tire wear. If energy clipping continues to occur on the long straights, rivals who manage their energy better could close the gap at crucial moments in the race. In that scenario, Verstappen could find himself defending his position rather than setting the pace from the front, something that's unusual when Red Bull has a perfectly balanced car. Therefore, the real focus this weekend won't just be on qualifying times or starting grid positions. The key will be observing how the car's behavior evolves lap after lap, and whether Red Bull can stabilize the balance between electrical power and active aerodynamics. Verstappen's engineer didn't find a broken part or an obvious fault in the car. What he discovered was a pattern in the data that reveals one of the major challenges of the new regulations. The car is extremely fast when everything is working within its ideal window, but when the battery runs out sooner than expected and the active aerodynamics continue to reduce drag, the car's behavior changes abruptly. This transition is what generates the sudden loss of power and the feeling of inconsistency that Verstappen has described throughout the weekend. This also explains why the Dutch driver's statements have been so direct when talking about these cars. The car depends on extremely precise coordination between the battery, the combustion engine, the energy management software, and the active aerodynamics. If any of these elements becomes unsynchronized for even a few seconds, performance can drop visibly at the end of the straights. This erratic behavior is exactly what appeared in the data the team analyzed after practice. Before I finish, I'd like to know your opinion. Do you think this energy management issue could really affect Verstappen in Australia, or will his talent continue to make the difference? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.